welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us at this year's press conference, talking about some of the key takeaways on this year's State of Asia America report. My name is Hope Atwell. I'm the Executive Director for AREA, or for the Asian Real Estate Association of America, and we're being joined by a few speakers today, including Mike Reagan from RE/MAX, George Ratu from Move.com or Realtor.com, and also Norman Chen from a recently launched nonprofit, also called Launch. And, we've been producing or publishing the State of Asia America report since 2016. So it's been a good 5 years that we have been putting together this report. And when the leadership of AREA decided to embark on, back then, what we had called the No Other campaign, to give Asian Americans and Pacific Islander a distinct category on the quarterly report that the US Census would put together regarding housing, we thought, well, how best to actually use a report to show the scale, right? The scale of our community, the economic power of our community, and all of that stuff. And hence, we started putting together the State of Asia America report. And it's been growing since 2016. And we're very, very grateful for all of the data points that we've sourced out in putting together this report, including Freddie Mac's data that has been really instrumental in looking at not just the growth patterns of housing, but our community. And even in the last couple of years, taking a look at migration patterns for Asian Americans, which I think will be a good highlight to include in this press conference. We're also very grateful for new data that we have from Realtor.com. So thank you for the partnership. Mike, you attended the annual convention in San Francisco in 2015, and immediately following that conversation, we talked about this report, and since then you have supported this particular publication, and this partnership continues to grow with RE/MAX. So thank you for that. And with that, I will turn it over to Mike Reagan. Mike is the Senior Vice President for Industry Relations and Global Growth and Development. Again, Mike has been a great supporter. RE/MAX has been a great supporter for AREA, and we thank you for the partnership. And I know Mike would like to share a few words regarding the partnership with AREA. Mike?
Well, thank you, Hope. Yes, I have my AREA pin on today. So, but no, it's so great to see so many of our friends from around the country, and soon we'll see you in person. But I really appreciate the opportunity. As a global network, RE/MAX appreciates the work that your wonderful organization is doing to unite the AAPI community. We're proud to once again put the RE/MAX name alongside AREA and Freddie Mac to deliver this powerful report. One of the core beliefs at RE/MAX is the power of association, and that's that individuals thrive in positive, productive, inclusive environments. At its core, home is that sort of environment, and that's one reason that RE/MAX is so passionate about creating home ownership opportunities for everyone, people of any heritage, ethnicity, nationality, or language. Serving buyers and sellers in the Asian American and Pacific Islander community is part of that passion. Understanding their needs, connecting on their terms, and finding solutions to their individual challenges aligns with our values at every level. It's what we do as a network with over 130,000 agents in more than 110 countries. It's what we do every single day. And to that end, we are honored to support the Asian Real Estate Association of America to present its 2021 State of Asia America report. This report is far and away the most comprehensive compilation of Asian American and Pacific Islander real estate and economic data available today. The report also provides a great overview of 2020 and the effects that we all dealt with of the COVID-19 pandemic and how it had such an impact on the AAPI community in the US. I encourage all real estate professionals to dive into this report and position yourself to provide unmatched service and value to the AAPI community. This report sets a standard for all of us throughout the industry. And as President Amy Kong so eloquently stated, read the report with action in mind, because we're all in this together. Hope, congratulations on another great report, and we look forward to seeing everyone very soon and in San Francisco.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate those kind words. And, you know, I would be remiss if I did not actually congratulate the staff who's put together this report, especially for Vanessa Shields, who has been putting together this report in the last, 2 or 3 years now with Jazz. And also with Joanna Wu this year, and again, the data that we get from Freddie, from US Census Bureau, from HMDA data and all of that stuff, it's just fantastic. And as Mike had mentioned, this year's State of Asia America report really delves into the impact of COVID, particularly the impact of COVID with our community, right? With the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. And the Q&A or the fireside chat with Amy Kong and our guest speaker, Norman Chan, would be looking at that. But first, let's talk about really what's going on with the housing market, as surprised as a lot of us are, right? The housing market during COVID and until now continues to be strong. There's very, very little inventory. And we've also seen the increase of our home ownership rate last year. So congratulations to the work that our members do with our partners and all of that stuff. So with all of those data and trends in mind, Tim Hurt, our vice president this year, soon to be installed as president next year, will be having a fireside chat with George Ratu from Realtor.com. Let me just read a quick bio on George. George explores trends in global economies, real estate markets, technology, consumer demographics, and investments. He focuses on extracting insights into drivers of real estate transactions while monitoring market and policy changes. George also promotes Realtor.com's brand and positions as an industry leader through media and industry presentations across the US. His research and insights have been featured in print and television by the Wall Street Journal. I know we've seen him, Bloomberg, CNBC, ABC, CBS. Association and higher education. As mentioned earlier, we're very pleased with this new partnership that we have with Realtor.com. So I will turn it over to you, Tim and George, to start your diving into trends and data from the report.
Absolutely. Hope, thank you so much for being our fearless leader and really spearheading a lot of this. And again, thank you so much to the staff. We couldn't do this without you, but this is such an important report that we produce, and kudos to, and again, thank you for our sponsorship with RE/MAX and Mike, and thank you so much for being a friend for ARIA for all these years and sponsoring the State of Asia report. But George, thank you so much for being on with us today. We were really excited. We have a short little period of time to kind of talk about the data itself. And we know that we're going to be releasing this very shortly, but it's been interesting, right? This has been a very interesting year. So, my first question to you really comes, what is occurring across the nation with the inventory, the demand, and the home prices? What is going on?
Great question, Tim, and really great to be here with all of you. And you're right. There's an old proverb, I guess, that says that it can come as a curse, I guess. May you live in interesting times, right? Well, we certainly have been living in interesting, for better or for worse. So I'll start by saying that where we are today is a really, really far cry from where we thought we would be a year ago. As most of you remember, when the government responded to the pandemic declaration by putting the business activity in the lockdown and quarantining across most states, we expected housing to take a nosedive and really have an unprecedented decline, really reminiscent of the prior housing bust of 2008-09. What ended up happening, however, is that amid the pandemic health concerns, the social distancing reality, Most Americans have resorted to homes as a safe haven. And in fact, it's this very pandemic and the aftermath of it, which has risen in terms of importance for Americans across the country when it comes to homes. And what we saw a strong rebound in demand back in late June a year ago, early July. Housing started rebounding with demand coming back, people starting going back to look at open houses. And that happened in tandem to a major fiscal and monetary, just as important, policy, right? The Federal Reserve not only lowered its overnight rate to near zero, but more importantly, became a main purchaser of mortgage-backed securities. The end result, mortgage rates declined, broke record lows about 16 times in 2020, and dropped to its lowest point January of this year, which really fueled a lot of demand. And there we basically have an incredible combination of young people coming of age. Roughly 5 million millennials are turning 30 every year for the next 3 to 5 years. Tremendous tailwind. In addition, they're forming families, having kids. And you combine that with the fact that on the baby boom side, a lot of baby boomers are looking to retire and looking at changing their housing situation. All of these have combined to a tremendous demand. What didn't keep up with this demand? Supply. First of all, we'll start with the fact that over the last decade, we have underbuilt in this country relative to population growth. By Realtor.com's calculations, we started 2020, right before the pandemic, roughly 4 million new homes short of where we should have been given household formation. And so with the pandemic, with what we've seen in lumber prices, builders are still very much behind the 8 ball, and we're not going to dig ourselves out of that hole in 1 year. But that explains why, as most of you have noticed, prices have now been on a double-digit upward trajectory for almost a year. And in turn, this has created tremendous pressures and challenges for first-time buyers, for a lot of minority groups, including Asian Americans. So obviously a market that's on one hand, tremendously positive, strong demand, on the other hand, tremendously challenging, because even with low mortgage rates, home prices that go up at 15, 16, 17% up compared to the prior year are going to crimp a lot of buyers' ability to qualify.
Well, that kind of leads me into my next question. And a lot of our report does talk about the rate of home ownership in the different segments of the country through our partnership with Realtor.com and our partnership with Freddie Mac. So, I'm actually surprised. Are you surprised, as I am, that the Asian American and Pacific Islander home ownership in a lot of these markets? I think our studies, the reports our report is going to state that 23% of our nation's top markets with strong Asian American Pacific Islander representation, we are at only 23% are we at or above the national homeownership level. I mean, that means we're significantly lower. I mean, we're struggling in a lot of these markets.
That's such a good point, Tim. And to be honest, absolutely, I am surprised. And here it's very likely that we have a combination of narratives that, as it turns out, are not always supported by the data. And I'll say this because we've had a decade of, for example, narrative that millennials will be a renter generation in housing who won't want to buy anything. Well, it turns out that, yes, when they were 25, they didn't. Now they're in their 30s and they very much are embracing home ownership. So I think similarly, perhaps the narrative around the Asian American community has been that you'd expect, because of higher median incomes, that they would have higher home ownership. But to me, looking at the underlying data, there are several nuances that stood out. Number one, the percentage of recent immigrants, right? That the report highlights that 64%. In addition, when you look culturally speaking at the Asian American community, family is very important. So larger families in one household could lead to higher median incomes. And when you combine that with another cultural preference, which I think is very important, by and large, historically very positive, which is a preference to avoid debt, have all contributed to credit history, which in many cases are very thin, right? So the way credit bureaus score the people in the US is by their usage of debt. So if you have a group of people that don't traditionally use debt, that don't necessarily resort to credit cards or other measures to build that debt, when they go to apply for a loan, a lender will simply cite lack of history, of credit history, and might deny them. So I think these factors, again, some of them are really positive. Not over leveraging yourself has traditionally been a virtue, but I think these have in a way contributed to where we are today, that even with higher median incomes in many communities, Asian American households are still not on par or above in terms of homeownership rates.
Yeah, it's, you know, our studies will show that the average Asian American household has a median income of about 93,000, which is somewhere between like 35%, I think, higher than the national average. Yet, you know, and we're buying more expensive homes too, typically. We typically buy about 65% higher priced homes. I think the studies will say something around 472,000, which is again higher than the national average, but we're definitely lower. And, you know, you hit the nail on the head. You know, you talk about the alternative to credit or the lack of credit. Credit files, and you know that is one of the things that, as ARIA, one of our policy points that we want to address. We believe and we know that providing an alternative to credit scoring model will increase home ownership rate in the Asian American community. You're right. Even my parents, you know, we were very risk averse, and you know, we didn't want to take on debt. My parents were very big on making sure that I did not have debt from college, debt from this credit cards. They used to yell at me when they saw my credit card. They're like, "What are you doing? No, why are you paying this interest? No, pay it off." It's okay to have, you know, they knew the concept of credit at times, so they knew it was important for me to get a credit card, but they did not want me to carry debt at all. So, you know, I do believe that is, you know, you hit the nail on the head. The lack of credit score, or the lack of credit, or the very small credit files is it is important. You know, providing an alternative credit scoring model with Representative Al Green is, you know, it's been introduced several times, but, you know, I think your studies as well as ours will say the same thing. You know, the language barrier, you mentioned that as well. I know that that's always been a big issue. And, you know, we want to make sure that we do have alternate, you know, language support to help provide, you know, housing support. You know, when my parents first came to the States, they had no idea how to buy a house. There was a lot of education. You know, English was their second language. So it was a lot of work on that stuff. You know, interestingly enough, and I know we have some time, if you look at the studies and, you know, you're seeing a lot of migration from what we call these gateway cities. You know, what we think of these Asian American populations, you know, really focusing on New York, Chicago, San Francisco, LA. We think of these bigger cities, but that's not what the studies have shown right now. We're seeing the migration coming to the South. You know, what do you think about that?
That to me is a sign of the times in many respects, meaning it's not just confined to the Asian American community, but rather broader population migration, meaning the South and Southeast, by and large, have attracted over the last roughly 2 decades, a lot of residents from, number one, and historically much colder states. Think the Northeast, think the upper Midwest, where residents would spend maybe winters down in Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, and eventually ended up moving there. So that's one. Two, the other thing, and just as important, I think, for our discussion, we have seen tremendous economic and employment growth in the South and the Southeast, specifically with a lot of companies, both domestic, but just as importantly for us, international companies choosing to locate in the Southeast. And just to give you, you know, high level examples, think of auto manufacturers. It used to be that in America, the manufacturing hub was up in the Michigan, the Northeast, Midwest area. The new automotive industry is now based in the South, Southeast. Think of the fact that Toyota North America, which was based in California, moved its headquarters right outside of Dallas in Plano, Texas. The implication was huge. It wasn't just the company's headquarters that moved. It was an ecosystem of parts suppliers and service companies that over 100 that moved to the area and brought along employees and households. Think of Hyundai moving assembly to Alabama. Think of Honda having assembly in Ohio and in the Carolinas for its jet, for its power sport. And so when you combine these things together, it shows you that a lot of companies have brought employees, have brought growth. And again, there's an entire ecosystem of companies that moves along with these large manufacturing behemoths. So as a result, population has been moving that way. Now, adding really a twist to this in a positive way, think affordability. For real estate markets, the Southeast markets have traditionally been a lot more affordable. For someone living in California and looking at a place in the Bay Area, for example, right, where we're looking at a median of $1 million, moving to a market like Atlanta, Raleigh, Charlotte, even Dallas means, number one, much lower price for a house, much bigger space, and even the cost of living by and large tends to be cheaper. So in a way, that was the least surprising part of the report for me, because the economic, the housing infrastructure and foundation was there all along. So I think for Asian American community, that this has been one of those trends of follow the growth and follow affordability.
No, it's interesting that you say that, because in Georgia, coming from Georgia, I was actually born in Houston. My parents actually moved to Atlanta thinking, and everyone used to say Atlanta, they didn't know where Atlanta was. They thought I was moving to Atlantic City. I moved here because there was a lot of trees and there was a lot of opportunities. The cost of living was cheaper. And, I do see the big manufacturing plants. I do see, when Hyundai opened theirs and Honda and manufacturers, where we saw Kia open theirs in LaGrange, Georgia, and we're seeing all this, the middle supply, the second tier, third tier part suppliers all coming as well. Then we saw Kumho Tires actually opening their factories with their, to supply the factory, tires. Then we have SK, who's developing the batteries for all these, these manufacturers and car companies. And then we have all these Fortune companies, Samsung, all these, and Hisense is located in Atlanta. The big TV manufacturer, U.S. operations is based in Atlanta. So we are definitely seeing the benefit of a lot of these being business friendly states in the South, really benefiting from the migration of the Asian American community kind of coming to Georgia in the South. Out of the 22 markets studied, out of the highest Asian American population at percentage, Riverside, California, 71%, Washington D.C. at 69%, Miami 69%, Houston 69%. Atlanta 67%. So 3 out of the 5 top cities of the 22 MSAs are located in the South with the highest homeownership rate and the population. And where we have highest population rates, such as like Honolulu or San Jose, Santa Clara, we're sitting at about 44% of the population in terms of the Asian American population, but only 65% homeownership, or 37% of population in Santa Clara, San Jose, with 59% homeownership. And what about SF in Oakland, Berkeley, 27% with 60% home ownership. But in the South has truly become the leader in paving the way for Asian American home ownership at 65.5%. And I do think it's because the cost of living is lower, the housing market is lower, and that the cost of houses are lower. And I did a buyer consult from a client from San Francisco, and it was interesting because we were like, hey, what's your budget? What are you thinking of? And they're like, oh, $1 million. And we're like, $1 million? Great. Our average price point here is nowhere near that. This is great. We can look at you, we can introduce you to a lot of different homes. And they were like, oh, should we go down in price? Like, I don't understand. Like, what is the average price point there? And so it was a lot of eye-opening, even for us as a team and a lot of our members from Georgia, talking to our clients and be like, oh, wow. Or, we have a lot of investor clients that are coming from California, from New York, and they're realizing that they can get a better ROI because their property values are cheaper. Or it's because we can, there's different eviction laws and landlord-friendly states and stuff like that. It is, again, are you seeing any of the, any of the COVID, I know Amy's gonna talk about the COVID effects and stuff like that, but are you seeing any of how throughout the country, like where why the migration is kind of happening? Is it COVID? What is it? What is the migration that's really being affected?
That's a very timely question, Tim, and I'm glad you asked it. And here, I would say that the pandemic accelerated several undercurrents that were already building, with one really big upside. And so I'll start by saying, first and foremost, that the economics and demographics have been driving this migration. So for millennials specifically, think young people who really led the urban renaissance of the last decade. They moved to New York, they moved to San Francisco, LA, Chicago, Boston, because they wanted an urban lifestyle. Companies followed, developers followed, and the urban cores became the places to be. Well, for many millennials, now that they're in their 30s and having kids, or 10 years into their career, still can't afford to buy in New York or San Francisco, they are now beginning to move to more affordable markets, and that can be in the suburbs or it can be across state lines. And here, markets like Atlanta, Charlotte in North Carolina, Orlando, Jacksonville in Florida have really been big beneficiaries. On top of that, and very importantly from the standpoint of 2020, remote work. Remote work is something that in a sense was implicitly promised back in the mid-1990s when the internet came on the scene commercially, that, someday you'll be able to work from just about anywhere, including, at the time, jokingly, the proverbial beach. Well, 2020 was that day, right? When, by necessity, mind you, many of us found ourselves working from home. And as a result, made actual decisions with their money, with their finances and families, and moved to more affordable locations because they realized if I'm cramped in a 2-bedroom or a 1-bedroom apartment in New York, I can just as easily work from 2 hours away in Connecticut or a 2-hour flight away somewhere near the beaches of the Carolinas, right? And so remote work, as we're seeing right now, is here to stay. For many companies, a hybrid option is the likely road ahead as people have discovered parking, transit, tolls, dry cleaning bills, lunches out, and all of those really add up. They're not as attractive as they once were. We're seeing companies large and small, not just tech companies, but financial companies and others resorting and looking forward to a hybrid landscape. For me, this is tremendous good news for real estate. Why? We're at the tail end of 2 decades in which the gains in real estate have accumulated mostly to coastal markets where the employment centers were. We're now seeing a democratization of wealth basically across the country as people are looking at mid-sized cities, smaller locales. And so it's a rising tide as buyers spread out, lifting real estate markets across the country.
You mentioned, I had a laugh at 2 comments you made, because the first one you talk about, the millennials, most of our millennial clients, the first question they ask me is, what's the internet service provider? Because I can only survive with X, AT&T or Comcast, or what we have in Atlanta is usually typically Comcast or Charter or Comp. It's interesting. That's usually the first question. Who is the Google? Who's the internet provider? I want Google Fiber. Only find me places with Google Fiber, or that was one of the first questions that came out during COVID. And I laugh at the other comment about dry cleaning, because I was talking to one of my consultant friends yesterday, and he made it very clear that he is able to afford a little bit more because he's not going out every day. He's not, having to spend that lunch money, and his dry cleaning bill apparently has gone down so much that he is so excited that he can go buy like this console that he wanted, this furniture console that he always wanted. And he's like, this is my dry cleaning money. And I was like, are you serious? And he's like, yeah, this is exactly what's happening. So it's really funny that you even mentioned that, because that is truly what's happening in the real world with the millennials and the Gen Ys, the Gen Zs. Before I go into Q&A, like, are you seeing any specific migration patterns within the millennials and the Gen Ys and the Gen Zs? Like, are they going to these hot cities like Austin? I know Austin's a hotbed. Charlotte. I know, we can talk about Atlanta, or are they going back to these bigger tier cities again? Like, do they want to go, you mentioned New York and everyone wanted to leave, but I don't know. I'm kind of seeing a lot of my friends that, they want to stay, and they want to go if you live in Atlanta, they want to go to these bigger, these bigger tier cities, like tier 1 cities. What do you think?
So based on data that we've collected over this last year at Realtor.com from, number one, potential buyers, recent homeowners who bought this last year, and sellers who indicated that they're looking to sell in the next 12 months, the emerging picture from this whole thing is that, number one, suburbs remain extremely popular. So to your point about millennials who flock to cities, they are very much embracing the suburbs. So that's one. Two, basically what traditionally were called second-tier cities Austin being one of those. But Austin has moved way beyond the status as a pioneer. Right now is a proper star. But think here Nashville, think Charlotte,
Yeah.
Asheville, North Carolina, even Raleigh, another market that generally was overshadowed maybe by Charlotte. All of these markets are seeing a strong influx of millennials and young families and young homeowners. And the one thing I want to sort of highlight here, because I think it's so important when we talk about young buyers, in downtowns, look at today's suburbs. They do not look quite the same as they did 15, 20 years ago. The insular places of residential here, commercial over there. What we've seen is the emergence of what I call the suburban downtowns over the last decade, where we see mixed use, residential, commercial, experiential retail, green spaces, bike lanes, and transit all mixed together. So in essence, the transition from Manhattan to a place like Atlanta, whether it's Midtown, Buckhead, or to a place like Asheville, North Carolina, for that matter, which has already some of these suburban downtowns, is a lot more natural, a lot easier, and for many, especially young parents, highly attractive. So I think all of these are combining to continue to make these markets across the country highly attractive.
So I got one of the questions that came in. How can brokerages prepare for the Asian American Pacific Islander migration that's coming in the Southeast? How can some of the, we have a lot of broker owners or agents on the call. How can they prepare?
That's an excellent question. And for me, the important thing to remember here is, and I know that some of you can speak even better to this. Number one, I think it's important to understand the culture, right? Because as we already chatted, some preferences translate very much into transactions. People who, for example, prefer to avoid debt may come with a lot more, for example, cash for an acquisition, which can be great in especially today's high competitive market. In another thing that I would say would be worth considering, where your Asian American buyers are coming from. Are they coming from California? Are they coming from New York? They might be bringing different market experiences and understanding. So spending time to talk with them about your local market, about trends, about, to your point, right? Do you need $1 million to buy the kind of house that you like, or could you spend less and take the rest and invest it, or do something else with the money? I think all of these would be very important considerations to keep in mind.
Well, George, thank you so much for coming on the call with us. We can't do this without you, and we're so indebted for all of our partners and our sponsorships that we have. And I have to give a special shout out to Georgia, because Georgia, we lead the way, you guys, in 66.9% of Asian American homeownership rate. So kudos to Georgia, because I'm from Georgia and I'm so proud of my state. George, thank you so much for coming on the call with us. And I'm pretty sure you'll get a lot of inquiries from our ARIA members, from our media. But thank you so much for coming on the call.
Thank you, Tim. Good to be here with you and all the ARIA members.
Absolutely. To continue on, we're going to have our president, Amy Kong, next talking with Norman Chen. Norman is a healthcare entrepreneur and investor who has helped to build leading life sciences companies in both the US and Asia. With degrees from MIT and Stanford, Norman grew up in the East Coast and now lives in the SF Bay Area. He is an advisor of several nonprofit organizations, including the Nature Conservancy. I do donate to them. The Children's Medical Foundation in Hong Kong and China, the Marine Science Institute, and Positive Coaching Alliance. In addition to being passionate about Asian American issues, Norman loves fishing and playing basketball. So to the stage, I welcome our Norman and our president, Amy Kong.
All right. Thank you, Tim. Great job. And thank you, George's insights. Very, very interesting. So welcome, Norman, to our State of Asia America Report 2021 press conference. So Norman, as you know, this year's report reflected some homeownership data change due to the COVID, right? Especially among the API community. And we are thankful to have you here today to share some of your research results. So I got an opportunity to read the entire report. So first of all, can you please share with us, why was it important for you to start launching Launch?
Thank you, Amy, for having me, and thank you to ARIA for inviting me to attend this event. We are passionate believers in the importance of data and really applaud ARIA for your comprehensive report on the state of Asian America 2020 and 2021. We formed Launch last fall because we were watching the rhetoric and the rise in anti-Asian American hate crimes and really disturbed. Growing up on the East Coast, but now living in the West Coast, and having lived 20 years overseas, we were disappointed to see that the status of Asian Americans in the US hasn't really improved as much as we would like. And we just felt like we needed to do something to give back to our community to try to make a difference. Otherwise, we would regret this opportunity for the rest of our lives. So a group of us, 6 friends, formed Launch. It's launch.org. And our first project was the Status Index, which you mentioned, which is really to look at American attitudes towards Asian Americans. We know from hate crimes research that attitudes and stereotypes are really the foundation of hate crimes, and that they, although benign in the beginning, can become quite dangerous when people become scapegoated during times of crisis. And unfortunately, we're seeing that now. We've seen that multiple times in the history of Asian Americans. And shockingly, there had been no report about American attitudes towards Asian Americans in over 20 years. And that's why we created the Status Index.
Exceptional. I love to see all these numbers because number really tell the truth. So in your report, you also share about 80% of the AAPI feel that they are not being respected or being discriminated, but there are only 24% of the white Americans do not believe anti-AAPI racism needs to be addressed. Can you share why there is such a disconnect?
Yeah, I mean, in our research, we found that there is a significant minority of people out there who are not aware, despite all the press about the hate crimes increase over the past year, they're still not aware of the dramatic number of attacks towards Asian Americans. It's 46% of Republicans, 37% of white Americans are not aware of an increase in hate crimes towards Asian Americans. And if you ask further, now that you're aware, should this be addressed? Still 24% don't believe this needs to be addressed. So it goes to lack of understanding, lack of awareness, lack of familiarity. And I think for your audience, we know certain parts of the country have higher Asian American populations. Other areas are emerging with larger Asian American populations. And so it'll be interesting to see how that trend or that migration you've talked about continues. Because in general, we found that in areas with more Asian Americans, they are more aware of Asian American issues, more aware of the discrimination, and more willing to try to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. So I'm going to ask you a very interesting question because during our prep call, I know that, you were born in the US, but then interestingly, you moved to Hong Kong for 20 years and then returned. You saw that things stayed the same for the AAPI community after this 20 years. Okay. So normally that would be a good thing to say, but why didn't you think that was the case?
Well, I grew up in Maryland. And so growing up in Maryland in the 70s and 80s, I definitely felt quite aware of being a minority. It wasn't really a vicious racism, but it was a lot of microaggressions and definitely feeling like an outsider.
Mm-hmm.
I then went to school in Boston and California, where I interacted with more Asian Americans, and that was wonderful. But it wasn't until I really lived in Asia, where you're from, Amy, Hong Kong, for 20 years, where I had great food, of course, but also got to really enjoy living in the majority. And that was an exhilarating experience. And so it gave me a better sense of my identity. And so when I came back to the US, again, about 9 years ago to California, I mean, we love it here, but you see still that Asian Americans are often perceived as not critical members of society, not well recognized, almost sometimes second-class citizens. And so that's where we felt that more work needed to be done. And then clearly with COVID and all the negative rhetoric and hate crimes towards Asian Americans, that really prompted us to do something and create the Status Index.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, now you can feel our pain, right? As an immigrant, I myself really truly, when I moved here, really feel like I don't belong. And with you, you're born here, so you don't have the language issue. But to me, the language is another layer of challenges to live here and cope with this particular society. So by being discriminated or not being respected, really truly hurt us as a citizen here in America. And well, we have to do something to make a change.
Yeah, well, I think you brought up a key statistic. Our data shows that 80% of Asian Americans do not feel respected in the US and feel discriminated against. And it's not just Asian Americans. 90% of African Americans feel discriminated against in the US, 73% of Hispanic Americans. So there is a huge issue for people of color. But for our culture in particular, respect, as you know, is one of the most important values in Asian culture. And so to grow up and live in a country and not feel respected, I think that's really harmful to people's mental health and sense of identity. So that's also what spurred us to really create the status index. So now at least we have a baseline of data. We know where we stand right now. There's some good news, there's some not so good news, but at least we know where we stand. And as we do this in the future on an annual basis, we can track our progress and see how things get better or hopefully don't get worse.
So since you mentioned something about this, can you also talk a little bit about attitude towards Asian Americans as authority figures? Share with us what your research also uncovered.
Yeah, this is very relevant to your audience. Again, we ask people how comfortable they are with Asian Americans in various roles. So if you take roles like friend, neighbor, co-worker, people love Asian Americans, especially as a doctor or nurse, because we're known for our wonderful work as caregivers, especially during COVID. However, you ask about more positions of authority, like an Asian American boss or an Asian American president, you see the comfort levels decrease significantly. Similarly, if you ask about having an Asian American son-in-law or daughter-in-law, i.e. someone who marries into the family, it's a more permanent kind of role. Also, you see a little bit less comfort level. So it's telling in how people like Asian Americans if they're their friends, neighbors, and also someone who works with them or doctor or nurse. But in a leadership position, people are not yet used to seeing Asian Americans in that role. There aren't enough role models here. And so there is real work to be done there. One other key stat, if I may, Amy, was about perceptions of Asian Americans in leadership positions, because there's this model minority myth that, oh, Asians are smart, hardworking, they must be successful. And in fact, when you ask people, do you believe Asian Americans are well represented in leaders of leadership positions in government, in the corporate world, et cetera, people generally say, over 50% say, yes, Asians are well represented, when in fact, Asians are severely underrepresented in those leadership positions. There's data from the New York Times and also from Ascend, another wonderful nonprofit organization, that shows in Silicon Valley, the ethnic group least likely to get promoted in Silicon Valley are Asian Americans.
Yep, you're so correct. So that's why ARIA is also partnering with them and also, promoting, and hopefully we will be able to advocate by 2025, there will be at least 10% of minority that is on their board seats. So that's the 1025 program that we are supporting as well. So Norman, how we will, how will the discriminations we are seeing today will impact the AAPI community in the long run, economically, and potentially on homeownership levels? What do you think?
Yeah, I think as you talked about earlier today with George and others, I think there are some very positive trends, right? Asian Americans are increasingly significant in terms of demographics in the US. We almost doubled our population in the last 20 years, and we're going to increase in numbers in the US and will be one of the largest ethnic groups in the country. Economically, although we have a wide variation among our different groups of Asian Americans, we are overall quite strong. So there's a lot of room for optimism. And our study actually did confirm that a lot of people appreciate the positive effect Asian Americans have on the US economy. So that's very, very positive. So overall, I think Asian Americans will continue to be an increasingly more powerful buying group, a customer group for the realtor and real estate industry. I think the question will be, will they gravitate towards the cities where there are larger Asian American populations, or we increasingly see them moving to places like the South, where traditionally they haven't been present as much? I think that trend is already happening, and I think very, very encouraging. So our belief is that Asian Americans are going to have more and more power, but we want to be represented in a more positive light in America. And that's our goal, really, to be to help shape that trajectory of how Asian Americans are perceived in a more positive way, not so much for our generation, but for our kids' kids, because we don't want them to face the kind of bias and discrimination that we did growing up.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Totally agree with you. So folks here on this call, if you wanted this report, go ahead and log into www.launch.org and you will be able to download this report. So, but in the meantime, I don't want to let you go yet. I would like to see if there's any question from the audience. So let's see if we have any question. So Norman, there is a comment saying, yes, it is one of the most important thing of our value, which is respect, right? So, okay, there is a question here is asking, what are the example of actions we can take in our day-to-day practice?
Yeah, so we kind of summarize it in 3 buckets: activate, advocate, and elevate. So activate, given the increasing awareness about AAPI issues, get active, learn more about Asian American history, find how you can get involved. Through your skills, through your time, through your financial support, there are ways that you can get activated. And number 1 is to educate yourself about Asian American issues. Growing up, a lot of us did not have the opportunity to take Asian American history classes. So I've gone back to really learn more about Asian American history, and it's fascinating. My daughter, luckily, can take an Asian American history class in high school. So educate yourself about the struggles and the triumphs of Asian Americans over time. Get involved and volunteer with organizations like ours, APIA Vote, Gold House, so many wonderful organizations out there that are really affecting change. Spread the word to your community. That's all really, really important. Advocate, as I mentioned, for Asian American issues. Don't just be a bystander anymore. Speak up, lean in. Don't just take it anymore, frankly. Our parents' generation, they worked very hard just to provide for us here. But I think we have earned the right to have more of a presence here in the United States. And then lastly, elevate, celebrate Asian American success stories, showcase Asian American leaders, support organizations so they can do more. There's really one of the positive things here, Amy, is just out of all this tragedy of COVID and the hate crimes towards Asian Americans, people are rising and they're activating, just thanks to you and other organizations like ARIA. And the younger generation, is really impatient for change. They're not complacent at all. And they're very, as you know, savvy on social media. So I'm very encouraged by the younger generation as well. So activate, advocate, elevate. Those are our motto.
Wow, excellent. Of course, one of the organizations to participate, of course, is ARIA. So there is a question actually for me. It's asking how ARIA help with developing leaders for our community. So of course, ARIA is a nonprofit organization. We have 42 chapters across the US and Canada. So go ahead, I would say, get involved, right? Get involved, you get an opportunity to mingle with other people that are like-minded with our mission to promote sustainable homeownership among the AAPI community. I'm 100% sure that kind of experience and opportunity will help you grow your leadership skill as well. As Norman, you say, staying status quo is no longer an option. We have to be the forefront leader to make a change. So I really appreciate your time. And thank you so much, Norman, for all you do. It is certainly important for all of us to understand our current status, then work together to make a change. So, and again, as we always say, continue status quo is no longer an option. It's time to make a change. By the way, this State of Asia America report will be available for all members. Visit www.aria.org to join and also download this report. After this press conference, it will be available for you to download. And at the same time, feel free to reach out to us. If you want this report to be presented to your group, our leadership are more than happy to share. We will be there to explain and share with you, answer questions. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a lot of work ahead. Let's roll up our sleeves, get to work on homeownership fair locally. Your work will truly move the AAPI homeownership needle. So I really appreciate and thank you all for joining this morning or afternoon. Have a great day.